Every year in the UK, the Teacher Wellbeing Index reports on stress levels and mental health in teachers. And every year, except 2020 when schools were closed, the figures continue to go up. Last year, reaching 75% of teachers who would describe themselves as very stressed. When this happens, burnout may be just around the corner. In this video, I'm going to describe my own experience of burnout, tell you some symptoms to watch out for, and give you some tips for avoiding burnout creeping up on you. My name's Rachel Roberts. I help freelance language teaching professionals work out the best ways to use their talents so they can earn more while working less. Stay to the end of this video to find out the symptoms you should be watching out for and how to avoid burning out yourself. Maybe you're currently working in a school but under enormous pressure and starting to think that working for yourself might be a better option. Or perhaps you're already freelance, but working way too many hours for a really low rate. Working hard is pretty normal within the education field, so you may just think that's how things are. But our minds and bodies are not designed to deal with constant long-term stress. Stress in itself isn't a bad thing. When our mind sees that we're in a challenging or threatening situation, it will give us a boost by providing extra chemicals like adrenaline and cortisol. These hormones help us take action. So far, so good. But there are two big problems. Firstly, our stress response is meant to be just a temporary thing before switching back to a calmer, more restful state. We're not supposed to stay in stress mode all the time. It's like trying to drive up the motorway in second gear. But modern life isn't a question of go hunting, get full of adrenaline and cortisol, then come back and have a big feast and eat and go to sleep. We're switched on and stressed all the time. Secondly, the human brain is not very good at distinguishing between a real threat and a threat that's actually just in our mind. This is why we're the only animal that can be perfectly safe, tucked up in our beds, and still find our heart racing just at the thought of these threats. And constantly flooding our system with these stress chemicals can cause us to become almost addicted to them, so that even when we do have time off at the weekend or on holiday, we find it really difficult to actually switch off. And if this situation continues for a long time, then we can be headed for burnout. Does any of this sound familiar? Let me know in the comments. So what exactly is burnout and how is it different from stress? To go back to the car metaphor, if you keep driving the car at 100 miles an hour in second gear, eventually it's going to burn out. Burnout is beyond stress. You feel exhausted most of the time and unable to face work. You'll probably have physical symptoms as well. I'm shortly going to go through a list of symptoms to watch out for. But first, I'm going to tell you about my experience of burnout. This actually happened to me twice, quite early in my career. I'm obviously a slow learner. The first time happened when I got a job as a director of studies in a small language school in Poland. This was my first managerial post, and as I said, I was quite early in my career, just 4 or 5 years in. So it was a big step up for me, and I really felt I had to prove myself. It was also a brand new school, which meant that there were no systems in place, and the whole teaching team were all straight off the CELTA. So the team needed a lot of support, and I had to put everything in place, never having done this kind of job before. I quickly found myself feeling overwhelmed, and I remember very clearly, even now, walking to work with my heart rate already pounding away. Looking back, I can see that while the job was incredibly hard work, a lot of the stress that I felt was actually around imposter syndrome. I didn't really feel qualified to do the job, which was fair enough in some ways, and people pleasing. I didn't want anyone to be able to criticize me, so I felt that I had to do everything perfectly, no matter how much effort or time it took. I actually stayed in this and related jobs for the same company for almost 4 years before I burnt out. I went back to the UK on holiday for Christmas and found that I just really didn't want to go back. It took that long because I was really hardworking, focused, motivated, and resilient. And this is something that people don't always understand about burnout. It affects those people who are really committed and hardworking and who can put up with a lot before they break. Does that sound like you? Let me know in the comments. So I didn't go back to that job. I took some time out, recovered, and then I got another job at an FE college in the UK, setting up and running their CELTA program. And everything went really well for a couple of years until I got my arm twisted into becoming head of department. Again, it was a big step up, an increase in salary, but there were aspects of that job that I really didn't feel competent to do around funding, etc. They told me that I would get support with that side of things, and then the person who was doing that job went on maternity leave at the same time as we had an Ofsted or a government inspection. I got through that okay, but not long afterwards, I found myself tipped over into burnout yet again. Fortunately, this time I did actually learn my lesson. I stopped doing management roles. I stepped down and went back to teaching and eventually went self-employed. But even more importantly, I realised fully that I had to change not just my external situation, but myself and my approach towards work. I wanted to learn more about myself, get better at saying no and having boundaries. So I started exploring counselling, doing an initial 6-week course, then a year's certificate, and eventually a 2-year diploma in counselling and psychotherapy. And of course, that feeds into a lot of the mindset work that I do with my clients today. Mindset and finding a balanced way of working so that your business actually works for you is a key part of what I do on my 12-week Flourishing Foundations business program, because this stuff will seriously get in the way of both your business and your life if you let it. If you'd like to find out more about the 12-week program, check the description in the video. So if you're wondering if you might be headed for burnout, what are the symptoms to look for? A key one is irritability. If you're finding that even the smallest things are tending to tip you over the edge, both at work and at home, that can be a definite sign that you could be headed for burnout. It's like your cup is already so full that even the smallest thing will just cause it to overflow. A weakened immune system is something else to look for. If you're always catching colds and feeling ill, and maybe you're not even taking time off because you have such a strong work ethic, but you probably should be, that can also be a sign. Constantly being in a stressed state has an impact on your immune system. It's also possible that you could eventually get diagnosed with a chronic disease of some sort due to this kind of stress. I ended up with an autoimmune kidney disease, which has been in remission for quite a few years now. But nonetheless, I know that this is something that was caused by the stress that I was putting myself under. Exhaustion is another symptom. I'm not talking about the kind of tiredness where you've worked hard that week and then you recover and relax over the weekend. I'm talking about the kind of tiredness where it doesn't seem to make any difference if you do get a good night's sleep or if you do take a bit of time off, you still feel exhausted. It's easy to mask that exhaustion with multiple cups of coffee, but coffee doesn't actually make you less tired. It simply covers up the feeling of tiredness so that you don't recognize it. And eventually it's going to catch up with you. And finally, another sign that people don't always recognize is increased forgetfulness. Of course, we all have these moments where we walk into a room and forget why we came in there. But if a lot of things like that are happening and things are falling through the cracks, that can absolutely be a sign that stress is getting too much and that you could be headed for burnout. When you burn out, one of the symptoms is brain fog and just not being able to hold on to things in the way that you normally would. And you don't want to get to that point. So if any of these symptoms are ringing bells, you need to stop and honestly assess what is going on and stop telling yourself, well, I can't stop because blah, blah, blah. Because if you don't, burnout will stop you anyway. So what kind of changes should you be making? There are basically two kinds of changes, practical ones and mindset ones. And the two are closely linked because if you don't make the mindset changes, then it can be hard to make the practical ones. It's very easy to say that you should be taking more breaks, getting out for walks, eating a balanced diet, even meditating. But if you're not doing those things, even though you know you should, it probably comes down to mindset. Perfectionism, people-pleasing, avoiding conflict, imposter syndrome, not wanting to say no. You may be saying to yourself, well, I have to work these hours, I can't afford not to. And there may be some truth in that. But you almost certainly do have options if you can give yourself enough time and space to step back and look at what those might be. I help people develop a business where they can work less and earn more. And there are always ways of doing that. It can be difficult when you're under stress, totally busy, to find the time to actually think about how that might happen. But I assure you the options are out there. Get in touch with me and let's talk about how I might be able to help you achieve that. In the next video on your screen, I'm going to be talking about the importance of money mindset and how it may be holding you back in your attempts to create a business where you can earn more while working less.